Hello, my name is Daryl Beyers. I'm a landscape designer with Poundridge Nurseries, and I'm here today. I've been asked to come in today to give a little talk about what I call indoor gardening. It's about houseplants, but actually I like to call it indoor gardening. It makes it sound a little bit more fun that way. Initially, if you think about houseplants, why would you want to grow houseplants in the first place? Some of the main reasons I grow houseplants in my own home is it brings nature near us all year long. It's like we can have our garden on the inside of our house. Another reason is the houseplants will bring life to your room. It's going to, get that garden, inside of the house. I don't know if you've ever been in a room that had no plants in it at all. It can feel a little cold, a little stark. You put one little pot in a corner, and suddenly things start to kind of, spruce up a little bit and pep up a little bit. Another big point, and a lot of people, really believe in this, there's certain plants that actually do it even better than others, is that the plants themselves actually purify the air in the room and help add a little oxygen into a room that might be, sealed up tight during the winter time. So that's another nice benefit. And finally, the houseplants can enhance the interior decor of your home. You can use it as a design element as part of your interior design style. So, a big tree in a large room with lots of sunny windows can sort of be part of a theme that you might then carry over into some of the furnishings and things like that. So, how do we make space for indoor gardening? There's a couple of key tricks to doing it, and I'll run through a lot of these things. Some of them a little more quickly than others, the design ideas, and then we'll get into some of the basics of houseplant care. We should have time to do all that. First of all, choose plants that fit the decor of your home. For example, if you have a southwestern style home, maybe it's a vacation home or something like that, or even if that's the kind of home that you have up here in the Northeast, you would want to grow cacti and other succulent plants, things like that. If you have a more traditional, say a colonial home, go with things like ferns and ficus and traditional plants. If you have a contemporary home, maybe you want plants that have a little bit more architecture to them, things like agaves and palms and stuff like that. So pick the plant that has the kind of look and feel that matches the interior decor of your home itself. The next step is you've got to work with the available sunlight that you have. If you don't have a lot of windows in the house, you're going to have to play around with a lot of lower light plants. In general, house plants tend to be lower light loving plants, just because obviously the inside of your house is not quite as bright as things are out in the garden. So you have to work with that available sunlight, and hopefully we'll get to a little bit more of that a little bit later on. One thing to remember, and a nice tip, is that the color of your rooms will absorb light. So if you have a lot of dark colors in the rooms, if the paint is a dark color, if you have a lot of dark woods, things like that, that's actually going to be absorbing a lot of light, and that makes less light available for the plants themselves. So plants will do better in a light that's painted a lighter color, lots of light, lots of sort of light textures or light-colored furnishings and things like that in it. There'll be more light reflecting, and that's available to the plants, so that's important. So you have to work with what you got. Then you have to remember the different seasons, or you're going to get different light. So in the summertime, which actually most of your plants should actually be outside in the summertime, but you're going to have a lot different light angles coming into the house than you're going to have in the wintertime. So you have to take those sorts of things into consideration. And a design idea, you want to follow a theme. It can kind of help. People love plants and they just want to have as many house plants as they can in their house. That's great. I do the same thing. But it can be nice if for room to room you maybe follow a theme where there's a lot of foliage plants that you would use in one room. Another room might have more flowers. Maybe it's an orchid room, things like that. And so you can do house plants in the same way that you would design a room in general, where you sort of get a theme going and kind of play with it and run with it. You could have trees in there, creepers. You could have a room with aquatics. Maybe it's a room where you still have an aquarium. Do something cool like that. It can be a whole lot of fun. The next point is you have to find the right pot for that room. So, for example, an old urn might work really well in a sort of a more traditional sunroom, and then you have the plant that kind of goes with it. Once again, contemporary homes, those sleek metal containers without a lot of Baroque attachments or filigree or anything like that. So have the style of the pot match the decor of the room. The pot is really an accessory, and you can just pick that pot and then find the plant that matches it. Or you can also go the other way around, where you found the plant that matches the decor and then you pick the pot that goes with it. So keep all those things in mind, and you'll actually start building yourself a really nifty interior garden. The other thing that you can do, and this is kind of fun, but not everybody does it, is you can build indoor planters. If you have the chance to do it, say you're redesigning a kitchen, renovating a kitchen or some other room, and there's good light in that room, see if you can come up with some interior planter designs where the planter is actually built right into some of the furnishings or right into some windowsills. I've worked in gardens where we sink tin liners right into a trough that's like right across the kitchen sink, and it's right in between the kitchen sink and a window, and we grow a whole garden right in this little window here. You just have to make sure that you have drainage, and then it goes down into some plumbing so you're not making a big mess in your house. I've tried a few little early techniques where I didn't have the right drainage, and you get into a little bit of trouble. You can wreck some floors and things like that. So make sure you do it right. But there are great ways to have built-in planters inside your house. All right, so what are some of the indoor garden basics, garden care basics? We kind of go through them quickly, and then I'll step back and we'll talk a little bit more in detail. You want to have effective containers. You want to find the right spot. You want to make the most of the sunlight. Then there's watering techniques, proper feeding, and when to repot. And then finally, I talk about taking things outside. So let's move right on to effective containers. Effective container, what's an effective container? It's the container the style is suited to the interior of the decor. We talked about that a little bit more. So, just find one that matches. Find a container you love, and then find a plant that goes with it. Don't pick clashing colors if you don't want to have clashing colors. If you want to have clashing colors, then you can do that. You can have a lot of different pots of different, shapes and sizes, or you can pick one style and kind of go with it and run with that all the way across. Make the size of the container suited to the room. So in other words, if it's a big, great room and you have a lot of space in there, don't fill it with, a couple of little pots. The scale is just not going to work out right. So there's your opportunity to get yourself a nice big urn, maybe bring yourself in a big ficus tree that's, could be 5-6 feet tall, or grow palms or other things like that. So if you have a big room, use a big pot and then find the plant that goes with it. If you have a little room and things are kind of tight, it's a windowsill, maybe lots of little pots, and you could to almost turn it into a little pot collection, which would be a lot of fun. The key to any container when you're growing houseplants is you got to buy the containers that have drain holes. Don't get the cash pots that don't have a drain hole in it, and don't buy one that doesn't have one, thinking that it'll be easy to drill one. That doesn't always work out, and you might end up just breaking the pot. It can be a little tricky. So buy pots with drain holes, and then you have to use saucers. And the key to the saucer is, for houseplants, you have to have a glazed saucer. If you just bring in your terracotta saucers from the outside garden that you use, on your terrace or someplace like that, those, if they're not glazed, that water when you water the pot, that water will absorb into the saucer, and then that in turn could stain a tabletop or some other piece of furniture. If you don't have the glazed saucers, then the next step would be to use cork mats or even plastic saucers that would go under all that. So it's a real important piece of the puzzle, is using saucers and saucer protectors. So those are your effective containers. So what's the next step? Find the right spot. You're suiting the style of the interior decor, and so if a plant makes sense in that room, then by all means bring some plants into there. That's kind of what the whole thing's all about. I want you to start thinking about using your houseplants as interior decor. I know you're a gardener, and hopefully you love gardening, and this is something that you really love to do. So here's your chance to kind of bring all that fun that you have out in the garden inside of the house. So look for spots where a plant makes sense. And then, use the plants that kind of, match that style of the room. For example, in a breakfast nook, maybe you want something that's a little fragrant. There's a lot of fragrances going on in the kitchen. Maybe someone's cooking onions or doing something crazy. You could bring in herbs. Maybe it becomes your little kitchen nook becomes your little herb garden houseplant collection. A lot of different ideas that you can play around with. Then you get into the more important thing, and that's working with the mini climates inside of the house. There's going to be sunnier spots and there's going to be shadier spots, and you really have to kind of figure that out, like kind of sit there one day on a weekend when you have time to maybe hang out in the house a lot more than normal and watch how the sun kind of plays through the room. You know which rooms are bright and you know which room is darker, and you're going to have to pick the plants that are going to match these brighter conditions or these darker conditions. For example, when I bring an orchid into the house, orchids don't like, when you buy an orchid, you want to treat it as if it's a cut flower, especially once the blooms and everything are all open. Which means you don't want it to get very hot, and you don't want to have a lot of sunlight on it. Those flowers are perishable, and so you keep that orchid out of direct sunlight, and you keep it in a cooler place, sort of a cooler, darker part of the house, and those flowers will last sometimes I've even got the full stalk of flowers to last a full 4 months, because if you put it in somewhere warm and it heats up, it's going to kind of kick into gear, and those flowers are going to finish quicker. So lots of times I bring orchids into darker library rooms or other studies and things like that. It'd be kind of nice. But then there's also lots of ferns that can take those darker colors, darker lighting conditions. Then the next step with the mini climates, you have to start thinking about warmer spots of the house versus cooler spots of the house. Be careful around heat registers. That's really important. You can just kill a sensitive plant if you don't think about it, and you put it underneath where there's a heat register and there's hot air blowing on it all winter, and it dries out, and you look at it and you wonder, oh, what happened to this poor plant? And then you look up and you realize that it's right under a heat register. Then you can also find places that are going to be cooler than others, so you want to be a little bit careful there. Next to uninsulated windows, or the floor on a floor that's exposed to the outside. Personally, I have a bathroom that has a really cold floor. I think they forgot to insulate it or something. So, that's a place where you don't want to have a pot directly on that floor. Maybe you want to kind of raise it up off the floor so it stays a little warmer. All right. So we want to make the most of our sunlight. So we talked about a little bit where a lot of successful houseplants are shade lovers or low light lover plants. It's going to be the easiest way to succeed. So there's things like Dracaena and metal plant and begonias, especially for flowers indoors. So go with lower light plants. If you're a gardener and you know plants that like shade, those are the plants that you want to be bringing into your house. You're going to have more success with them. With the sunlight, then understand those seasons and exposures. That south-facing window is going to get nice and hot and warm, especially in the summer. A little bit less so in the winter, so it's going to be a really useful window. Then there's the other idea of east versus west exposure. Morning sunlight, if you're, as all gardeners know, morning sunlight is always a lot cooler and less harsh than afternoon sunlight. So an eastern exposure is going to be isn't going to be as strong of a sunlight as that western exposure when the sun has kind of had all day to heat up. So maybe your western exposure, your sort of southwestern exposure, would be your cactus and your succulents and things that can take a lot of that heat. And your eastern exposure might be some flowering plants that need a good hit of sun to get themselves going, but then later in the day they want a little rest, and so they're better off if the sun's on the other side of the house. Changing through the seasons, we've talked about a little bit, summer into fall, and winter into spring. The height of the sun is kind of different. It's just like gardening. That lighting is always going to change conditions. Direct versus diffuse light is kind of another piece of the puzzle where right up against the window, and I'll show a little slide that'll show how this works. Right up against the window is where your hottest, most direct sun is. That's where it's really cooking, right? That's where your big sun's coming. Then the further you get away from windows, unless you have a lot of skylights, you're getting more and more diffuse light. Now, if you're in a lighter colored room, a lot of that light's kind of bouncing around, and you're getting some good light, all around your plants. But you have to remember that most of the sunlight in a room is going to be diffuse light. Very little of it will be that direct sunlight coming right through the window, unless you're lucky and you have a great conservatory, or you have big skylights, or you have lots of really nice big windows. But in a typical house, the majority of light hitting houseplants is diffuse light. Then it's when you start working with this, and we know that the light is kind of stronger coming into the windows, and it's a little bit diffused throughout the room. If you have plants that are right up against the window, you have to be careful, because if you just keep them in one spot, sitting in that spot the whole time, we've all seen it where the plant starts to reach towards the sunlight. It's not actually that the plant is smart and it's trying to get light. That's not really how it works. And that has more to do with the way that the cells grow, different speeds based upon where the lighting is. And so people always think that the plant is reaching for light. It's not entirely true. It's more of a function of the physiology of the cell growth. But in order to keep that from happening, a little trick that I learned when I first started doing a lot of indoor gardening is every week or so, just turn that pot a quarter of a turn. So, on every Friday or every Monday, go do all your pots that are by windows and do a quarter of a turn. And then the next week, do another quarter of a turn. It works better using quarter turns than half turns, because a half turn, then you get this plant that just starts waving back and forth, where the quarter of a turn, you really never see that lean. It kind of keeps the whole thing working. Another thing to remember with the lighting as well is, a plant with a lighter, greener leaf, that you know that's what it's supposed to look, and that leaf starts to get really dark. A philodendron, for example, it starts to get really, really dark. It's like darker than it really ought to be. You know that the plant isn't getting enough sunlight. Part of the reason is it's not making enough it's making more chlorophyll in order to manufacture more food from the sunlight, and so that's what's making it darker green. Now, if you like it to be dark green, that's great, just keep it, but understand that the plant is probably a little bit stressed and it's trying to work itself out. Let's see. So I wanted to show these slides talking about the realities of indoor sunlight. When you look at this slide, I thought this was a really terrific illustration of how the sunlight kind of changes from the distance that you get as you get away from the window, and also the width of the window. The height of the window is also an important factor. You can kind of see how if this window was even taller, we'd have a little bit more of this sort of part shade area, a little bit closer. And then another important piece is how tall off the floor level is that window. That's also going to change the exact locations of the lighting inside of the house. So you see, if you look at this, you can see there's just that one patch which is full sun, and then after that we're getting to more and more partial sun, and then finally we get deeper and deeper into the shade. And so it's a fun way you can kind of go home and look at your own windows, try to figure out how that sunlight is working inside of your own house. The next step is to understand, you have these windows and you understand how it's diffusing as it gets further into the house, but the side of the house that the window's on, the aspect or the exposure, which ordinal direction it is going to make another big difference, because the angle of the sun is going to change the way that the light comes in there. So we can see how the northern sun, especially on A, you're not getting hardly any you're really not going to get any full sun at all. And then the eastern and the western are similar, but kind of slightly different angled. And then that southern exposure is the main one where you're going to get the most amount of light. These illustrations kind of get you thinking how that sunlight actually works coming into the window. The first time I ever saw these illustrations, it really helped me understand. I've been spoiled a lot as working as a head gardener at other places where we had conservatories and greenhouses, and you don't even think about it. But when you get it into your own house, you start to realize, I'm really limited here, and I gotta make the most out of whatever I can get. Okay. So we'll get a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of gardening. We have some time left, and let's make sure we make the most of it. Watering techniques. I wanted to talk a little bit about watering techniques. It's important. You can kind of wreck your plants if you don't water them right when you're inside of the house. So first off, it's the basic technique of top watering. That's where you come with your little watering can, you put the water right on the soil. The key to that is making sure you water it so you, just like your outdoor plants, where you see the water come through the pot and fill up the saucer. And what happens is you get really good at it inside of your own house because you actually know how much is going to go into that pot before it starts filling that saucer and then potentially overflowing. Out in the garden, no big deal if it overflows. Inside the house, it's kind of a different story. I've gotten into trouble a few times that way, overwatering and then making a big mess and wrecking floors and stuff like that, so be careful. But this technique is fine for most plants. Then there's bottom watering. This is for plants that have more sensitive leaves. African violet is one of the main examples, or maybe in maiden fern or something else like that. And so that's where you're actually watering into the saucer itself, and you're allowing the water to wick up into the soil around it. A lot of people will set up big trays with stones, set all their pots in there, and have that be their whole garden, and they will bottom water everything. It's a nice way to kind of keep it easy. There's submersing, which is when you take the whole pot and you just dunk the whole thing right into the sink and just submerge it. That typically is useful when you have a really root-bound plant, because there's like when you figure it out, because every time you top water it, the water just runs right through. None of that water is getting into the soil. So what I like to do is submerge that pot, and then I can pull it back out again. That's how I water my orchids. I'll submerge them and then just pull them out, because the orchid medium is usually a bark, so it's really porous and water just runs through it. You also do submersing if you really want to soak something up because you're getting ready to repot it, and you want to kind of make sure the entire thing is completely soaked, because it's best to water all your plants before you repot or start playing around with their roots. Wick watering is a really fun technique. The illustration kind of shows how that works, where you take a piece of thread and you wind it through the root ball, and then you have that come out of the bottom hole, and then you have that thread go into a water basin. It can be right under it, like in that little picture, or it can even kind of arch over and go into another pot, and that water will wick up through that thread and get into the soil around the roots. It's a good technique, I think, best used for if you're going on vacation or something like that, because it looks a little crazy and it's kind of funny looking to have all these strings and everything going all. I've spent all this time talking about how you can make your plants be part of your interior decor, and maybe your interior decor isn't a whole bunch of threads all over the place. But it's a great technique if you're going on vacation, because you can just run that thread through the top part of the pot too, not through the bottom hole, and you can get the water into the pot and kind of keep the plants alive while you're on vacation if you don't have anybody to help you water. The 3 levels of watering needs. You probably read this a lot on houseplants, the houseplant labels, but what exactly do they mean? There's moderately moist soil. So what does that mean? That means the soil is never soaking wet, and it also never dries out completely. So if a plant needs moderately moist soil, that means never water it so much that it just stays soaking wet, and but also at the same time never let it dry out completely. I usually just test with my finger, and I'll the surface can be dry, and if I reach a little deeper down and I feel some wetness in there, then I think, okay, it's still okay, but then after a certain point, I want to add a little bit of water, make sure it doesn't dry out completely. You can use water meters. They're useful in greenhouse settings when you're going real quick. If it's just it's just your house plants, you can get away with just kind of putting your finger in there and checking it out that way. The other level of water need would be dry between waterings, and that basically means you water the plant, the water runs out through the bottom, or it goes wherever it's going, and then you let that plant dry out completely in between waterings. I grow a lot of succulents indoors because I like this watering technique, because I can forget to water my plants and it's not a problem. I'm busy doing lots of other things, and so I have found that succulents for me are sort of my best choice. Cactus plants, yuccas, agaves, they match the style in my house too, and then Some of my few good exposures are southern, so it gets hot. And so I can also kind of do their watering technique, which is I water them maybe once a month, if that, and then I just forget about it. And then there'll be a day where I'll walk by them, I'll be like, oh, yeah, I'm supposed to water these once in a while, and then I'll water it, and I know it's getting dry in between waterings. And then the other one would be keeping it dry, and that's like really heavy-duty cactus and things like that you just you really don't water them at all. I just ignore them. I have a big golden barrel cactus, and this is one where, matching it to the pot, I got a terracotta saucer pot and a golden barrel cactus, and it's a great fit, it's a great match, and I never water it. I take my plants outside during the summer, it gets all of its sort of water then, and then it comes in during the winter time, and then I just look at it. It becomes almost like a sculpture. I don't really mess around with it a whole lot. And I'll see it over the course of the winter, kind of slowly, like looking for water, but I like to watch it and see what it does first. And then as soon as it's time to take it back out again, I get it back outside. Some of the basic tips for watering: use lukewarm water. It's just better than super cold water if you can do it. Empty the saucers if you can. For some plants, I like to keep that water in because then that water can then wick up. But for other plants that don't want to, if it's one of those dry out between waterings, maybe you want to empty that saucer so there's not a whole lot of water left for it to wick up. A little bit like gardening, watering in the garden. I like to water in the morning just because it gives the water to the plant when it's going to use it, as opposed to at night once it gets darker. And then if you can, especially with foliage plants, give them a little spray, give them a little spritz every once in a while. It kind of cleans off the dust, kind of keeps them happy that way. If you ever are unfortunate enough to get spider mites or something like that on some of your indoor plants, what I've learned is you give them a cold shower, and it washes off the spider mites and actually, kills whatever eggs they might have left on there, and then it stops them in their tracks. You might have to check them in a couple more weeks and just to see if they came back or not, because they tend to. But at least by giving them that shower, you've sort of taken care of the problem a bit. In general, if your indoor houseplants the leaves are really starting to turn yellow, like you'll notice your gardenias will do that. It could be a couple of different things, but lots of times it's because it's getting too much water. You're watering it too much. And a lot of people do overwater their houseplants. Because you have to remember, inside the house, if you remember the way the lighting works, the plants really aren't firing like they would if they were outside. And so they don't need as much water to stay alive. So you don't need to kind of keep giving them all this water that they don't even want. It can get too soggy down there in their roots. So it's important. Feeding quickly. There's several different types of for feeding your plant, different ways to feed the plant. Water-soluble fertilizers are great if you want just sort of the ease of things, and that's like the Peters or the Miracle-Gro stuff. I always do my chemical fertilizers, water-soluble chemical fertilizers. I follow the instructions, but I cut the amount in half because I'm just a little nervous about using too much of it, and I don't want to shock the plant. I don't want to burn the plant. It could be too much nitrogen. Slow release fertilizer, Osmocote is the main one. It's the pellets that you kind of spread on the top. Great for trees, indoor trees, because every time you water, then some of that fertilizer will get released. Emulsions are wonderful. Seaweed and fish emulsions are great. It's organic. It keeps the soil really healthy. It can be a little stinky though, so just keep that in mind. A lot of people are doing compost tea now for their outside garden, so you can also do it for your indoor plants. And that's where you take a prepared compost, regular ready-to-go compost, and you mix it and kind of by mixing it, you mix it into water, and that kind of aerates things and gets it all mixed around in there, and then you use that water to water your houseplants, and you're getting the nutrients right into the soil right off the bat. And then there's also potting soil recipes that you can use. Lots of different recipes that are useful and that already have the built-in nutrients. As far as timing, you don't have to do a lot of feeding in the winter because your plants are going dormant. But you could feed them about maybe every 2 to 3 weeks during the summertime growing season. I think is a pretty helpful part. Quickly again. When do you repot? I like to repot at the start of spring because things have been hanging out inside in the winter time indoors all winter, and then I want to kind of give them a bunch of fresh potting soil so they're ready to do a lot of growth over the summer. I'll also always repot anything that's root bound, submerge it first and then do a repotting. And then if the soil just seems like it's like, if I forgot when the last time was that I repotted something, is usually a good time to repot because that means the soil might be kind of done. The big thing that I'd like to do is to, it kind of coincides with my repotting technique, is that I always like to take all my houseplants outside, as many as I can. There's some that I keep indoors because my wife won't let me take them all out because you want to have some plants inside. I'd be happy to take them all out, but she makes a good point. It's like we're gonna lose all this, sort of nature indoors. We don't want to lose everything. Like, leave me some. So I always leave her a few, maybe some of the herbs or an aloe plant or something like that, and then. Everything else goes outside, goes into the garden, spends the summer, grows as big as it can, and then it's the winter time that I bring it back in. And a lot of people, you'll get a lot of questions about the bugs being on the plants. You have to inspect them before you get them back in, and you have to slowly take them out in the spring so they harden off and they don't get freaked out right off the bat by all of a sudden being outside and exposed to the elements. So, you do it slowly and do it the right way, but sort of you can kind of rotate things in and out, and the plants will love you for it. They'll do so much better over the summer, and then when they come in the winter, they'll be looking really good and have a lot of strong growth on them, and then they just kind of hang out in the winter. And the other key thing anytime you're doing indoor gardening is to just have fun. Make sure you have a good time doing it. Pretend like you're out in your own garden. Don't be afraid to do things to a plant that you think are gonna maybe you think it's gonna help it, maybe it's not. Gardening's about experimenting. Indoor gardening's the same thing. I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned a little bit about how to do indoor gardening, and go out today, get yourself a new plant, and see where it takes you. Thanks.